see what you've got!
Now, episode 3. This one was a pretty big challenge, but I personally loved the way it turned out. There was a huge chunk in the middle where I had no idea what to do, but thankfully, I'm working with a very talented team of composers. We helped figure this one out together. Over here at the beginning, we used another little Space Voices embellishment over top the recap music. By itself, it just sounds normally like this. But in this episode, I elected to add in some high space voices, and only high space voices, because I felt like it added a bit of like a sense of more urgency. Lower space voices felt warmer, and I didn't want that feeling here. Once again, when I add on that embellishment, I just have to lower the volume just a bit so you can hear the narrator just fine, both in the embellishment itself and the main recap track. In this opening section, I sort of overplayed my hand with Goku's Nightmare. If I could go back and redo it, I personally would probably have something else original written for this scene. It's like 3 minutes where I looped Goku's Nightmare, and it's a little bit much, and it makes the first half sound a little weak. If you're in this section, I added another snake hiss, as Raditz says they're going to come back and destroy the Earth. Don't want to overplay the snake, but I needed to spice up the scene a little bit. This right here is a snake hiss that I wanted to sound like it panned from left to right as he went upwards. Just a little echo from Goku when he yells out for Gohan.
Gohan! Gohan!
And of course one more snake hiss as Raditz flies away. Thus ending the scene, which should nicely transition into the sadness music. Over top here on this theme, which is dubbed Serious Suspense because it's possibly the most commonly used track used throughout the show, and there really didn't seem like a better title for it, so I just call it Serious Suspense, and I try not to overplay it, but I debut it right here in episode 3 during this dialogue sequence. Of course, I spice it up a little bit with a couple embellishments when they say a few goofy lines.
He stunk.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Me too. I've got it.
Just a few little smoky room notes, as the instrument's called. A small little cue for when Krillin reacts. And over here we debut our way into Techno strategy. I wanted a slow start to help ease it from the Kame Tough track, because we sort of had to make a tone shift. Doing this whole segment was rather tricky in editing, and the composer's side too. This whole sequence was a bit of a challenge. Throughout the Techno strategy track, we had a few comedic beats we had to hit with Krillin and Master Roshi when it cuts back and forth to them. So we added a few smoky room notes, which is one of the most commonly used goofy instruments used throughout the show. In the early days, they mostly used something called cartoonin', which you always hear at the halfway break, and the other one is smoky room. Personally, I'm more fond of smoky room, but when we get to Namek, we'll try to use cartoonin' more often. Also, this whole sequence went through a lot of different trial phases for just how we wanted to do the goofy little embellishments over top Krillin and Roshi. We had a completely different one that felt a little slower and offbeat, so we ended up with this, which was a little bit faster, a little more on beat with the techno music that we got going on here. And initially we had it just end like this. But you know, obviously something goofy was needed over top. And this was the trickiest one to get right, honestly. But I wanted something to take advantage of how the track goes up in measures when it ends. So just to get something goofier on here. Personally, I like how it goes up and then we pitch bend it down. Pitch bending always sounds really goofy, and it's a favorite little trick of mine to add some real goofiness to it. A couple simple smoky room notes just to add on to match Krillin. Still managing to keep it on beat with the track so it doesn't take away from the feeling of the track. Over here is a subtle little embellishment I'm sure most of you probably missed. This was Joe adding just a little sparkle sound effect when Bulma mentions Dragon Balls in the dialogue. I thought it was a nice little touch of detail that absolutely no one was going to notice.
Oh, Gohan had a Dragon Ball on his hat, didn't he? So we can use the Dragon Radar.
Basically, when she mentions Dragon Balls, we just added this little sound on top. Doesn't hurt or take away from the track at all. Just a little something extra is all. Here we have we added a little surprise cue to help lead into the next track. Nice little transition. What I really like, and this was Joe's idea, was the extra little cartooning notes to match Bulma's comment about, well, at least they're not in outer space. And that's interesting too, because if you watch the Ocean Dub version, Bulma's line delivery on that sounds like it's something we were all wondering, and it's a relief that they aren't in space. But here in the Funimation dub, it comes off like a goofy line, so we treated it as such. All by itself, the transition sounds like this. This little section is a bit we took from episode 119 or 118, Frieza's Counterattack, which was only used in the broadcast version, and we carefully recreated it. Maybe it might not be one-to-one perfect, but I mean, for our purposes here, in our version of the Saiyan saga, it doesn't hurt. But it was tightly edited and cut down a little bit just to fit the scene. Just a little fun fact about it. So this whole track was made from scratch by Joe, with some of the drums actually ripped from the episode and layered on. That was a lot of work, but I don't know, the end result comes off pretty. I really like this goofy little transition here. So deflated and pathetic. It's great. And of course here we have our surprise Frieza era track, which we used. But what you might not notice was all the extra bits we layered on top of it to make it feel more like Piccolo. For starters, we added a couple Mercado string hits, low ones so it sounds like Piccolo's original theme, a little help from a friend, the dun dun. So we added a couple of those, but in this context it sounds more like a shark or something. Here we have some isolated strings that we also added on top. We let this one layer a little bit past the Frieza track to help it ease into the next track, which is Piccolo Angry. This one is also a bunch of layers mixed together, but it got too messy, so I mixed it down to one track for the final product. And last but not least on this is the choir. So altogether, the ensemble should sound like this. This is interesting because this is actually original track from the show, a Cell era track for like a one-off scene that was overwritten for Piccolo being mad at Vegeta surpassing him. But we needed a Piccolo theme for the Saiyan saga, and we couldn't just use A Little Help from a Friend because it's too somber, it's too sad. It didn't fit Piccolo still being a villain. Not to mention, it debuts when Piccolo finds Nail, so it's kind of like a somber fallen warrior type theme, and it just didn't work for Piccolo, so we needed something a little bit new, and I was opting to go for Piccolo Angry since it's not necessarily like an evil theme, but it's much more aggressive. But Joe came up with the idea to add in a series of strings and choir and all these other elements that can be layered onto it to really transform it into a different sounding track. And of course, we added just a little something to match Bulma's goofy little elements, something subtle that doesn't completely take away from the scene. This little bit was actually one of my ideas in the 11th hour, where Piccolo tells them that they should team up, and then I added a little extra string cue hit right here. All by itself, it sounds like this. And that was accomplished using the high string embellishments you can add on top of Piccolo Angry. So this was a little thing I added in. All by itself, it just sounds like this. And likely it's already mixed into the final track, but it's mixed in so quietly you really can't hear it. This was just for an extra sting hit to match the scene. And the way I went about editing the scene was adding more instruments as we went along. So my favorite part is after he says to team up, when the choir kicks in. This is a choir we like to use a lot to try and match that feeling of the Ocean dub, to sort of thematically make it feel like you're watching the Ocean dub a little bit, but Funimation's version. So it's kind of like a blend. We clearly take a lot of Ocean dub influences because we love the Ocean dub version, and we're not trying to replace it, but we're trying to give that feeling of nostalgia and make it as good as you remember it. So this choir is typically used a lot, typically for a lot of villains and Raditz, but we wanted to use it for Piccolo a lot too. The issue is, once you introduce that choir, then the track starts to get real heavy, so you gotta mix it real low if you don't want to drown out the voices. One last little embellishment for Bulma's goofy little antics for the road. And fun fact, that is also used to disguise a clumsy little edit I made. Not necessarily clumsy, but I needed to edit it for timing, and you'll notice it's slightly offbeat just because of the way I had to edit, and then I took advantage of this little goofy embellishment to help disguise the edit. Because I needed the track to end here and have a brief moment of silence before we kick in the wind orc for the next track.
And when that time comes, I promise.
This one was pretty straightforward. It didn't require a whole lot of editing, and it didn't have a whole lot of extra embellishments added to it. We added a tiny little cue here for Krillin saying "unbelievable."
Terminated. Unbelievable.
We didn't want it to be too distracting and take away from the scene, especially since Krillin says it off camera in the background, so we weren't going to go overboard with it. But fun fact, we actually had 5 different embellishment sounds that Joe went through, and we ended up doing that one with the kalimba just because it sounded the most natural with the track Kami's Tale, but it might be nice just to show off some of the other sounds that we could have went with. Here's Cartoonin'.
Unbelievable.
Here is Pot Sticker.
Unbelievable.
Here is Smoky Room.
Unbelievable.
Here is Wooden Xylophone.
Unbelievable.
Over here near the end of the track, when we had a little extra space, we just added a little bit of extra space voices to the ensemble to really get the juices flowing of the scene. Nothing much, just a little something to really like embellish over top Goku's shot. Now over here with the scene with Raditz, we have Gohan and Raditz. We have a simple little embellishment Joe wrote as he destroys the truck. All by itself. And then right here, just recycling the same goofy little piano trill that we did for Krillin in the previous episode. But for comedic timing purposes, I sort of cut it and chopped it down a little bit before Raditz picks up Gohan. Near the end of the scene, we added a couple embellishments over top the part where Raditz's scouter picks up Gohan's power level, add a little extra surprise to it. And then over here, we added a few extra strings for tension. I personally wanted these to stand out a little bit more, but I feel like in the final episode mix you can barely hear them. Near the end of this scene comes one of my favorite transitions we have ever added to the show. The prompted cue said, we need an exciting transition for this scene when we go from slow tension built scene with Raditz to exciting Goku and Piccolo are on their way. Can we get an exciting transition for that? And Joe put together this. Isolated all by itself, this is what the transition sounds like. I personally think you did a really great job. And right here is a subtle transition. I just wanted something simple that just moved on to the next scene while made it feel like it naturally flowed. What it is basically an added layer of space voices with a drum that kicks off the beat of the following track. Isolated transition sounds like this. Right before Goku and Piccolo arrive, I just needed a quick little exciting transition. So we threw together a marcato string and something called Ascent, which adds some instant excitement. All by itself, it just sounds like this. Here, there was no transition. These two tracks just flowed seamlessly one into another. that's the type of seamlessness we're striving to achieve. Here it transitions into another Frieza era track that I thought suit nicely in this spot with Gohan. And that was all Joe adding to the end of his Saiyan confrontation track. Here I sort of carefully cross-faded before the Frieza section comes into the track. And then sort of recycled a track from episode 2 that has Raditz hunting Goku. The cymbal hit the timing pretty well of Gohan kicking the space pod. Now, onto the face-off track. This one was a big doozy, you'll see in the timeline, but the transition inward was fairly simple and straightforward. Just a reverse drum slap. Not much more to it. But the track itself has numerous layers added onto it. You have the basic face-off track, which I adjusted the tempo so it could match the scene a little bit better and hit that length. And the first layer on top of that is just space voices, low space voices that are mostly there for atmosphere. And at this section, our first choir hit comes in. And we have several carefully timed choir hits for this whole section here. And all of this is carefully volume adjusted. Each layer has to be carefully timed and adjusted so that it's not drowning out the voices at any point, especially when the choir hits come in. I like this section and the space voices because the space voices gets a little more higher to match Goku's personality. We roll it back here. We have a little water phone sound effect that we threw in for Raditz's inner monologue. Not to mention a little Raditz guitar. Couple liquid stacks. Time to the beat of the face-off music, of course. This layer on the bottom here is sort of the percussion layer. And of course we have a goofy line from Piccolo where he says, "What am I, your tailor?" So we added just a couple little cartooning notes. Nothing too crazy. A few Raditz guitar riffs. Trying to spice up the scene. And of course that also comes with its own choir, that section. And for this final section, we put the horror music back on, add a little tubular bell for this part when it cuts back to Raditz, still on beat. But of course here, we just add a little horror as the camera pans in on him. here we just have an extra liquid stack. Still on beat with the music. For those curious what's up here, this is just Raditz's echo for the big dramatic line.
You're a disgrace to all Saiyans! Now prepare to die!
But I had to carefully adjust the volume for that so it doesn't... I didn't want it to sound too busy while the action was happening. And of course here we debut, well that's not true, episode 2 debuted it, but this was the scene that Raditz's theme was originally written for. With a nice transition that ties into it. Not much was added or embellished onto it, just the fact that it was nicely written to have a surprise ending that leads into the closing theme. And that should do it for episode 3. That's pretty much all she wrote.
Yeah. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.